Hello, bookworms. Welcome to the Bonified Bookworm. And if you're here to read along with me and improve your English. And I'm your host, Rachel. I wanted to remind you all that the next book we're going to read is Untamed Seas by Deborah Scaling Kiley and Meg Noonan. So that'll be our next book. I expect that we'll finish Touching the Void by Joe Simpson this episode. So let's just get back to it, because when we left off, Joe made it back to camp, and Simon and Richard were trying to get his pants off and his boots off so they could check out his leg. So we're about to see what his leg really looks like. So here we go. Touching the Void, Joe Simpson. All right. Page 191. About halfway to halfway down. All right. So they just yanked everything off, and now they're going to look at it. Bloody hell. Fuck me, it's enormous. That's what she said. The leg was a bloated stump, stained yellow and brown, with livid purple streaks running down from the knee. There was no discernible difference between my thigh and my ankle. Only the hugely distended lump, which twisted grotesquely to the right halfway down, showed where the knee had been. God, it's worse than I thought. I felt weak at the sight of it and reached forward tentatively to stroke the skin around my knee. At least there was no angry inflammation, no obvious signs of infection. It's bad, Simon muttered. He was examining the underside of my foot. You've broken your heel as well. Have I? Oh well. It didn't seem very important to me. Foot, knee, the whole caboodle. What did it matter? I was down. I could rest and eat and sleep. It would mend. Yes, see those purple streaks? They're signs of hemorrhaging. You have them all around your heel and the ankle as well. Here you go, Richard. I said, take a look at this. He peered over my shoulder and then pulled away hurriedly. Oh, I wish I hadn't. I laughed happily, noticing how quickly I had changed. The manic, hysterical laughter had become a thing of the past. Simon pulled my long johns back over my legs with a worried expression on his face. We'll have to get you out of here quickly. The donkeys are coming in the morning. One of us can go down and ask Spinoza to bring a mule and his saddle as well. I'll go, Richard volunteered. It's 4:30 now. I'll go after this tea. That way you can use my sleeping bag and Joe can take yours. I'll be back by 6. Hang on, I interrupted. I need rest and food. I can't cope with 2 days on a mule straight away. You'll just have to, Simon said sharply. There's no question about it. It'll be 3 days at least before you get to the hospital. You've got frostbite as well as the leg, and you're exhausted. If you leave it any longer, it will get infected. But forget it. We go in the morning. I will have been broken for over a week by the time we reach Lima. It will, oh, yeah, I was like, I didn't read that right. It will have been broken for over a week by the time we reach Lima. You can't risk it. I felt too weak to argue and looked imploringly at the two of them, hoping they would change their minds. Simon ignored me and began feeding my legs into his sleeping bag. Richard passed me some tea, smiled reassuringly, and then stepped out into the night. Be back soon, he shouted from the darkness. But already I was falling asleep. There seemed to be something important still to do before I slept, but I was losing the struggle to keep my eyes open. Then I remembered. Simon. What? You saved my life, you know. It must have been terrible for you that night. I don't blame you. You had no choice. I understand that, and I understand why you thought I was dead. You did all that you could have done. Thanks for getting me down. He said nothing, and when I looked across at him, lying on his back in Richard's bag, there were tears on his cheeks. I turned away as he spoke. Honestly, I thought you were dead. I was sure of it. Couldn't see how you would possibly have survived. It's okay. I know. God, coming down alone, coming down. I couldn't bear it. I mean, what was I going to say to your parents? What? I'm sorry, Mrs. Simpson, but I had to cut the rope. She'd never understand, never believe me. It's all right. You don't have to now. I wish I'd stayed longer. Just believed you could still be alive. It would have saved you so much. Doesn't matter. We're here now. It's over. Yes, he said in a choked whisper, and I felt the unstoppable flood of hot tears filling my eyes. How much he had been through I could only guess at. A second later, I was asleep. I awoke to a hubbub of voices and laughter. Girls' voices chattered excitedly in Spanish close by the tent, and I heard Simon talking to Richard about the donkeys. I opened my eyes slowly to the unfamiliar glow of the tent walls. Excuse me. Sun dappled the red and green fabric, and shadows passed by every few seconds. It seemed as if there were a bazaar in full trade outside the tent. I remembered with a shock the events of a few hours before. I was safe. It was true. I smiled drowsily and moved my arms against the silken, downy sides of the sleeping bag, luxuriating in the feeling of homecoming. It had been so bad, I thought idly in half sleep, so very bad. An hour later, I started from sleep to a voice calling my name from far away. I felt confused. Who was calling me? Sleep dragged me softly back to the warmth of the bag, but the voice kept calling. Come on, Joe, wake up. I rolled my head to the side and looked blearily at the heads crowded in the doorway. Simon knelt there with a steaming mug of tea in his hand, and behind him the two girls peered curiously over his shoulder. I tried to sit up, but couldn't move. A great weight was passing down onto my chest, pinning me to the ground. I swung my arm feebly in an effort to haul myself up, but it flopped limp at my side. Arms reached around my shoulders and pulled me into a sitting position. Drink this and try to eat. You need it. I cupped the mug in my gloved hands and crouched over it, feeling the steam wetting my face. Simon moved away, but the girls remained squatting near the door, smiling at me. There was something unreal about them sitting there in the sun, watching me drink tea. Their wide-hipped peasant skirts and flower-strewn hats seemed very strange. What were they doing here? My mind seemed to be running off at tangents from second to second, so that I couldn't fully grasp what was happening. I had got here safely. I understood the tents and Simon and Richard, but not these weirdly dressed Peruvians. I decided that the best thing to do was ignore them and concentrate on my tea. It scalded my mouth with the first sip. The gloves which protected my frozen fingers and the lack of sensation in my hands made me forget how hot it would be. I gasped and blew quickly, trying to cool the tip of my tongue. The girls giggled. An endless stream of food and drink followed during the next half hour, along with quick snippets of encouragement and information about what was happening. There was some delay because Spinoza was being bloody-minded about payment for the mules. I could hear Simon's voice getting louder and more infuriated with every passing minute. I heard Richard translating calmly to Spinoza. The girls occasionally looked over at Simon and frowned. Then suddenly they were gone, and there was no more need to stay awake. I slumped forward and drifted into sleep, letting the chaotic Spanish-English row fade into the background. A hand shook me awake again. It was Simon. You'll have to get out of the tent now. We're packing up. He's finally agreed on a price, and if he changes his mind again, I'm going to rip his bloody head off. I tried to shuffle around to move out of the tent, and I was horrified by how weak I'd become. I fell sideways as my arm buckled beneath me when I was half out of the tent, and I couldn't push myself up again. Simon lifted me gently and dragged me clear of the sun. Simon, I'll never be able to cope with the mule. You don't know how weak I am. It'll be all right. We'll help you. Help me? I can hardly stay awake, let alone sit up. How can you help me ride a mule, for Christ's sake? I need rest. I really do. I need sleep and food. I've only had 3 hours sleep since I got down. You've got no choice. You're going today, and that's that. I tried to protest, but he was having none of it. He walked over to the tent and returned with the first aid box. Richard passed me another mug of tea, while Simon handed me my quota of pills. Then they left me and began dismantling the camp. I lay on my side watching them until I couldn't fight off the appalling drowsy weakness any longer. The deterioration scared me deeply. It made me wonder anxiously whether I had burnt myself out completely. It occurred to me that I was nearer to death than what I had been alone. The minute I knew help was at hand, something had collapsed inside me. Whatever had been holding me together had gone. Now I could not think for myself, let alone crawl. There was nothing to fight for, no patterns to follow, no voice, and it frightened me to think that without these, I might run out of life. I tried to stay awake, fighting to shake the sleep away and keep my eyes open, but the sleep won. I dozed fitfully, waking to the babble of different languages and dozing off again to the recurrent thoughts of comas, collapse, and unwaking sleep. It seemed a long time before Simon came to me again. I heard his voice talking to Richard and looked up. He stood by my side, examining me with a worried expression on his face. "Hello, are you all right?" "Yes, I'm okay. I'd abandoned any idea of resisting the plan to leave." "You don't look it. We'll be leaving soon. Perhaps it would be better if you sat up and tried to liven yourself up a bit. I'll get you some tea." I laughed at the thought of being livened up, but managed to sit up, unaided all the same. Eventually, Spinoza led his old mule to me, and Simon helped me to my feet. Leaning heavily on his shoulder, I hopped towards the mule, which waited patiently. It looked a pleasant-natured, calm old animal, which encouraged me. As I was about to be lifted into the saddle, Richard suddenly called out, "Hang on, Simon, we've forgotten his money." A hobbling search then began, with Richard and Simon supporting me on either side as I directed them from rock to rock, vainly trying to remember where I had hidden the money belt. Spinoza and the girls looked puzzled. We laughed happily until at last we found the belt and held it up for them to see. They smiled politely, but clearly didn't understand what was so important about a tattered piece of tubular climbing tape. The saddle was one of those old-style, high-pommeled Western affairs with huge cups of carved leather for stirrups and ornate silver inlays round the pommel. A caramat had been bent over the saddle as a cushion and to keep my injured leg swinging out free from the mule's flank. We set off down the riverbed at a steady walk, with Simon and Richard walking on each side of me, keeping a watchful eye on my condition. The next 2 days were a blur of exhaustion and pain. I couldn't squeeze my thighs together to steer the mule, and it seemed to walk into every tree, boulder, and wall that we passed in the 20-hour journey to Cachatambo. Even with Simon spiking it with a sharpened snow stake, it still blundered on, and I screamed and howled impotently until the pain died. Somehow I managed not to fall. The familiar landscape drifted past me, blurred by pain and exhaustion. At the end of each day, childish tantrum feelings would rush through me. I no longer had the strength or desperation to cope with this added torment. I wanted it finished, wanted to get home. Simon mothered me down through the bad times, walking back and forth on the trail, goading the donkey driver to increase his pace, exhorting the man pulling my mule to take care, and walking close by my side when sleep and weakness threatened to topple me from the saddle. He took my watch from me and halted the march every time a new drug had to be administered. Painkillers, Warnicol, antibiotics, and the inevitable tea. Tempers frayed around me as I drifted in and out of sleep, while the mule walked doggedly on through high passes, steep rocky valleys, and plush pampas. But Simon stayed close by my side, encouraging some faint boost of strength whenever I pleaded for a rest. Cajatambo was a mayhem of hassle as Simon battled with the police to hire a pickup truck, and then both he and Richard fought off the hordes of villagers trying to climb into the back for a free lift to Lima. At the last minute, a young man approached the truck. I lay stretched out on a mattress in the open back. He looked sorrowfully at me, seeing the crude splint on my leg. A policeman with a machine pistol slung across his chest stepped forward and stopped Richard trying to remove the last villager from the truck. "Senor, please, for you to help this man. His legs are bad. 6 days he waits. You take him to hospital, yes?" There was a shocked silence as we all turned to examine the old man slumped beside me in the back of the truck. He looked imploringly at me, and then, grimacing with pain, he rolled his hips and flicked aside the crude sacking covering his legs. The crowd was suddenly deathly silent, and I heard the sharp intake of breath from Simon close by me. The man's legs were smashed. I had a brief glimpse of 2 distorted legs, ripped open, raw wounds, blood stains, and the deep, angry purple color of infection. A sharp, sweet stench rose from the blanket as he replaced it gingerly over his legs. My God, I felt sick. He is bad, yes? Bad? He hasn't a hope. I'm sorry, my English is not good. It's okay, we'll take him, and this man, I interrupted. Thank you, senors. You're kind men. The driver was an alcoholic who supplied us with generous quantities of beer. Beer, cigarettes, and painkillers gave a cloudy film to my memory of those 3 days struggling back to Lima. Late that night, we arrived at the hospital. The old man, we were told, could not afford a good hospital like this. We said it was no problem and paid the driver for the hire of the truck with instructions to take the man to his hospital. As Richard helped me out of the truck, Simon gave the man's son our last remaining supplies of painkillers and antibiotics. The truck pulled away into a muggy, hot Lima night, and from my wheelchair, I saw the old man trying feebly to wave his thanks before it turned the corner of the street. The hospital was frighteningly out of date by our standards, but there were clean white sheets, tinned music from the ward speakers, and pretty nurses, none of whom spoke a word of English. They wheeled me briskly down the green and white corridors, with Simon hurrying beside me, unable to relinquish me from his care. The enormity of what we had been through was just beginning to sink in. An hour later, Simon and Richard had been brusquely told to leave. After being x-rayed, my stinking climbing clothes had been taken away to be washed, and I was sat naked on a set of chair scales as a pretty nurse took my pulse, noted my weight, and drew a blood sample from my arm. I turned to see the scales and was horrified. 7¼ stones, 3 stones. God, I lost 3 stones. She grinned cheerfully at me before scooping me off the chair and lowering me gently into a deep bath of hot, disinfected water. When she had done with me, I was put to bed and instantly fell asleep. An hour later, she was back, this time with a concerned-looking doctor. He explained something frightening and complicated about my blood sample while she punctured a vein in my wrist and set up a glucose drip. I woke in the night from dreadful nightmare memories of the crevice soaked in sweat and panicked to screaming point until the nurses came with words of kindness that I couldn't understand. I lay there for 2 indiscernible days without food, painkillers, or antibiotics until my insurance was confirmed by Telex and they deigned to operate on me. They came for me early in the morning. A pre-med injection in my arm an hour earlier had reduced me to a familiar, enfeebled, barely conscious state. 2 people, masked, wearing green, muttered unintelligibly at me as they wheeled me down seemingly endless tiled corridors. It wasn't until we neared the operating theater that the fear in my stomach rose up as panic. I mustn't go through with this. Must stop them. Wait until you get home. For the love of God, don't let them do it. I don't want the operation. I said it calmly. I thought that I had said it clearly, but they did not answer. Perhaps the drug has affected my speech. I repeated the sentence. One of them nodded at me, but they didn't stop. Then it hit me. They don't understand English. I tried to sit up, but someone pushed me back onto the pillows. I shouted, panic-stricken, for them to stop. The trolley clattered through the swing doors of the operating theater. A man spoke to me in Spanish. His voice was melodic. He was trying to calm me, but the sight of him checking a syringe made me struggle to a half-sitting position. Please, I don't. A strong hand pressed me back. Another gripped my arm, and I felt the slight pain of the needle. I tried to lift my head, but somehow it had doubled in weight. Turning to the side, I saw a tray of instruments. Above me, bright lights came on, and the room began to swim before my eyes. I had to say something, had to stop them. Darkness slipped over the lights, and slowly all sounds muffled down to silence. Well, I thought we would finish this today, but we have a postscript. We have a 10 years on. We have an epilogue. So we are not going to finish it today. So we'll come back. We're going to stop on page 201 at the postscript and see how things turn out for him. I don't think that some Americans, unless you've traveled overseas or to other countries, understand, like, we don't, not we, but some other countries won't provide health care or services or anything until you can pay them. Like, even getting him off the mountain with the mules, that was an emergency. But you notice the guy, Spinoza, wanted to be paid. He wanted his money first. So just kind of interesting. It's different here. Typically, like, if there's an emergency situation, people are going to help you. We'll figure out payment later if it's an emergency. But maybe they didn't view it as an emergency. I don't know. But anyway, we'll pick back up next time. Hope you all have a great day, week, month, wherever you're at. Hope it's great, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.